So hello, everyone. My name is Daisy Daniel, and I am the AMCD Professional Development Chair. And today I'm very excited to bring this webinar offered by Dr. Taunya Tinsley and Mr. Jerry Jasmine on focus on family and integrative framework for counseling athletes across the lifespan. So a little bit of information about our speakers today. Dr. Tinsley is currently at Transitions Counseling Services, LLC, and she is the incoming AMCD president-elect, and she's also an ACERVIC board member. And Mr. Jerry Jasmine is a second-year master's level student at the University of Central Florida. He's also a recipient of the 2018 NBCC Minority Fellowship. So thank you so much for joining us, and I will let you guys take over.
Thank you so much, Tessa. Oh, it's a little echo. Let me make sure. Okay, let's see. How's that? Thank you, Dessa. Appreciate it. Appreciate all of your assistance with getting this set up. I'm very excited to have this webinar today and with all of you joining. I remember in 1994 when I was a master's student at University of Iowa. And as part of my thesis and research, I was focusing on athletic counseling. And at that time, my advisors at University of Iowa said, what is athletic counseling? There is no such thing. There's sports psychology. And then that is at that time where I became very passionate about wanting to expand on the work of Dr. L. Pettipaw at Springfield College and being able to prepare professionals to work with the athlete population from a counseling perspective. So I'm excited that you all are here today. I'm very excited to have Jerry Jasmine as my co-presenter. I'm very proud of him and the work. He probably feels like he's been in a class with me for the last few weeks, but I'm very proud of him and excited about what he will share with you as well today.
I'm excited to be here as well. Thank you, Dr. Tinsley, and I'm honored to be presenting alongside you. I initially sought you out after reading an article about working with athletes. I didn't think that it was a possibility in my field because I often get a sideways look when I tell even instructors that I want to work with athletes in this field. So I am honored to be able to present alongside with you today.
Thank you. I think one of the things that Jerry and I have done today, because for both of our experiences, it's really like defending a dissertation and really providing a rationale for the work we do with the athletes. So that's part of what we are going to do today as part of our objectives is to examine the current research on the developmental concerns of athletes across the lifespan, as well as best practices to counteract these concerns. We will talk about how to apply family systems techniques to mitigate familial concerns and their effects on athlete sports performance. We will help you to understand corrosive communication patterns and negative cycles of interaction among athletes and their family members. And we're going to identify evidence-based skills and techniques from couples counseling, family counseling interventions to apply with athletes and their family members. And prior to doing this, it's really going to give you kind of a history and an overview of sports counseling, of athletic counseling. But before we get any further, I would like to see who is on the webinar today. So I love using poll everywhere. So I would ask if you all would be willing, whether it's on the website or texting, and I put a sample, you're going to text to 37607. My name 668, but don't put the Y on my last name. So as you can see, I have a sample text message there where it's Taunya, T-I-N-S-L-E 668. So I'll give you a moment to either do it by website or text message. Thank you, Dessa, for putting that in the chat box. Or they can text 37607 text that same part to 37607. Okay, so hopefully everybody is got connected. You should get a message that you've joined Taunya Tinsley's session. So when you are finished with the poll everywhere, you can just reply leave and it will take you out. Doesn't text you, doesn't send any messages. So what is your primary professional role? So text your letter A, counselor educator, B, LPC. So we can get a sense of who is on the call, on the webinar. Excellent, okay. No athletic advisors, we got LPCs, that's great. Counselor educators, that's great, 56%. Master's level, doctoral level students, wonderful. Okay, so that gives a sense, and you'll see I've tailored this to all of the populations that are here, but as well as other helping professionals who work with the athlete population. Next thing I would like you to do, just briefly using your chat box, and all you have to do is click the chat box icon. I would like to know what interests you about this webinar. So if you could use the chat box so Jerry and I can get a sense of why you're interested in this webinar. And I saw some people I know, so I'm gonna call some people out if I don't start seeing any answers why people are interested in the webinar. Yeah, I was gonna call you out, but that's okay. I have a lot of students who are interested in this topic and have little familiarity with the population personally, okay? To learn about counseling frameworks for working with athletes, great. Work with college students and wife to an athletic director, it's relevant to your work, absolutely, day to day. I'm fascinated with the use of counseling for athletes. I want to learn more as a counselor, great. Interested, hi Paul, in life transitions as they apply to all areas of life and ministry, especially pastors. And Paul, you know we've generalized this research to that of pastors as well. There's not a lot of talk of info about athletes, great. I'm a student interested in working with this population, wonderful. Hi Noriel, I'm interested in the fact that you're addressing across the lifespan because it's not being talked about, absolutely. I'm a master's student and I'm pursuing a career in athletic academic advising, so I want to know as much as possible and when I enter this career, great. Drug and alcohol, I like that. Interested in alcohol and drug policy violations. Student affairs, excellent. That was my master's degree, higher education, college student development, and that's where I became interested. Interested in learning more about athletes and counseling frameworks specific to this population, great. And I will say for everybody who's on here, whether you are doctoral students, master's students, counselor educators, even students sitting in our classroom are former athletes, and to really understand frameworks for understanding them in our classroom, in addition to those being clients. Looking to expand and offer an alternative to athletes that have no idea how our profession can really help. Wonderful. This is wonderful. Thank you everyone for giving us, for people on the phone, can you slow down so they can hear your questions as well? Someone just emailed me, okay. I'm a student affairs MA student. I'm currently doing an independent study on student athletes. Wonderful. So let me go back and just reiterate for those that are on the phone. I have a lot of students who are interested in this topic and have little familiarity with the population personally. To learn about counseling frameworks for working with athletes. As a therapist that works with college students and wife to an athletic director, it is relevant to my work. I am fascinated with the use of counseling for athletes. I really want to learn more about this as a counselor. Interested in life transitions as they apply to all areas of life and ministry, especially pastors. There is not a lot of info or talks about athletes. I always wanted to work with athletes in this field. I'm a student and interested in working in this population. So hopefully that will help. That's good to give Jerry and I an idea, and we'll be checking the chat box throughout. We have our presentation, and then at the end, we will open it up for questions. So we will be presenting for a few minutes, and I sound like a pastor now. We'll just be presenting for a few minutes, and then we'll be opening it up for questions. So sports is a microcosm of society. There's a couple quotes that I wanted to share with you as it relates to sports and a microcosm of society. Leslie Toogood and Gill in 2008 stated that sports permeates all aspects of society. That is, even a person with very little interest in sport will interact with it in some way. Sales and Harrison in 2008 stated that sports reflects American society and is an inherent component of national and campus identities. And they further stated that sport is a microcosm of society. Every conceivable activity that occurs in society occurs in sport. So we're going to link the literature. We're going to talk about multicultural and social justice counseling competencies and how they work with our work with athletes, the history of sports counseling, understanding athlete culture. I'm going to weave in some codes of ethics as it relates to our work. How do we apply this with the various helping professionals? And then Jerry's going to expand more on family counseling, specifically with the athlete population. So as part of giving evidence-based research, we're going to weave in our experiences of working with athletes, as well as our personal experiences of being former student athletes as well. So first I'll talk about the multicultural competencies. As we know, multicultural training has taken up the challenge of preparing counselors to help clients from a multicultural, multi-ethnic, and diverse socioeconomic society. Since the late 1980s, multicultural training has been a component of the professional mandates of the American Counseling Association and the American Psychological Association. The multicultural and social justice movement, the fourth and fifth forces in counseling, have contributed to the counseling profession's greater and much needed understanding and appreciation of real differences among racial, ethnic, and cultural groups. So training counselors who are able to address the unique needs of student athlete population, a group not always thought of as a specific and diverse culture, presents some major challenges. So by extending the principles of multicultural counseling to include athletes, counselor educators and professional counselors and other helping professions may be in a better position to receive formalized training, respond to the developmental needs of the athlete population, and enhance the quality of services that are provided to the specific and diverse cultural groups, student athletes. Now, one of the reasons I came from this direction from multicultural counseling, when I was in my doctoral program at Duquesne University, I had faculty as well who weren't real familiar with sports counseling and were really trying to understand how I was going to connect the athlete population with the counseling population. So I stated that if I could show that athletes meet this definition of a unique cultural group, and that I could then apply this unique cultural group with the multicultural competencies, that will give us a better rationale and support of the work we provide athletes. I also brought in CACREP because CACREP requires all students in programs, counselor education programs, to experience and demonstrate knowledge in the social and cultural diversity. So I really wanted to take our competencies, I really wanted to take CACREP and provide a rationale for why we should work with athletes. The multicultural and social justice counseling competencies revises the multicultural counseling competencies. So with both models, we as helping professionals who work with athletes, I don't care if we're counselors, counselor educators, we really have to be aware of our attitudes, values, and beliefs. William Sedlacek conducted a study at University of Maryland, and he found that students as well as faculty and staff held negative biases and attitudes towards the athlete population, which then impacted their ability to relate and engage in personal relationships. Students had negative attitudes about why athletes got certain perks as a Division I student athlete. Why do they have special living arrangements? Faculty couldn't understand why students could get special permission to miss their class and not be held accountable for docking points or not having consequences set when they were traveling for games. And so William Sedlacek did show that we as helping professionals really need to be aware of our attitudes and values and beliefs. Additionally, we have to be knowledgeable of the athlete culture and the diversity within the culture. We also have to develop culturally appropriate skills and techniques while developing a cross-cultural relationship. There is such a separation between athletes and non-athletes that sometimes when you're interacting with this cultural group, the athletes, it's that saying, I don't care what you know until I know that you care. And there's oftentimes when I worked at University of Pittsburgh, I was coordinating the tutor program, and we had students that wanted to be a tutor, not to help the student athletes, but to say, oh, I get to be around this athlete, I get to be around that athlete. And it really impacted that interpersonal relationship. So using this multicultural social justice counseling competency framework will really provide evidence and support for working with the athlete population. So let's talk about the history of sports counseling. Counseling athletes and sports counseling has been the focus of a number of authors who have outlined the developmental needs and concerns of student athletes for professional assistance. The practice of counseling student athletes preceded the development of preparation programs for educating counselors for this specific population. I know that when I started working in athletics, there really wasn't a training program. You were kind of learning by experience in athletics. However, there were journal articles that were out there. I did a literature review and found an article about counseling athletes all the way back to 1967. So there has been research and articles written in the field of psychology, social work, as it relates to counseling athletes. In 1985, Najudlo and Arredondo and Benjamin, they were part of this Counselors of Tomorrow. They were identifying the type of counselors that were going to be needed in the field. And at that time, in 1985, they developed athletic counseling competencies. And having Dr. Arredondo on that committee was really important because when she was president of ACA, she was really an advocate and support for developing the ACA Sports Counseling Interest Network. Also, Dr. L. Pettipaw from Springfield College, he started the master's program in athletic counseling. They were the only program in the United States having an athletic counseling program. The only difference at that time when I was doing my research, they didn't have the licensure requirements for that. So that became a passion of mine when I was working on my dissertation at Duquesne University, is how can we weave in sports counseling in clinical mental health counseling programs as well as for licensure. There's also an organization that's previously called N4A. It's the National Association of Academic and Student Development Professionals. This organization consists of professionals who work with college athletes, but there's also college counselors. They have a conference every year that focuses on college student athletes and issues and concerns. And then the NCAA. They had mandated that every Division I institution provided an academic support services for student athletes, as well as supports life skills programs. So there used to be what's called the CHAMPS Life Skills Program. And so these programs and programming was offered prior to any training programs. So after I graduated from Duquesne University, Dr. Pettipaw collaborated with me, and we offered an athletic counseling course in a counseling program, CACREP counseling program at Duquesne University. There has been other programs who have offered courses through their psychology department, through their sports management department. And then while at California University of Pennsylvania, we developed the graduate certificate in sports counseling. So now there is a specialty program in a CACREP-accredited program, and those courses could be used for electives for students in master's programs or doctoral programs. So what exactly is sports counseling? It is a process which attempts to assist individuals in maximizing their personal, academic, and athletic potential. This sports counseling is accomplished through a proactive, growth-oriented approach that incorporates the principles of counseling, career development, movement science, psychology, and human development. This is the definition that came out when they developed the Counselors of Tomorrow. And then in 2009, Dr. Kay Williams, she was a doctoral student at University of Iowa, and we really pushed to add this area of specialty with ACA, and it is currently in the ACA Encyclopedia of Counseling as well. So the whole idea with sports counseling is that those who work with the athlete population should have specialized knowledge and skills beyond the basic counselor preparation, and that it's critical that individuals in the athlete's world become aware of their attitudes that may influence the type of treatment the athletes may receive. So in my doctoral program, I then took the multicultural counseling competencies. I added a component from Gargi Sadowski's multicultural counseling inventory. She had counseling relationship, and she allowed me to adapt her instrument, the multicultural counseling inventory, to develop the multicultural sports counseling competencies. These competencies consist of 4 dimensions and is defined as the extent to which the counselor has developed and integrated self-awareness, knowledge of the athlete population, culturally appropriate skills and techniques to utilize with the athlete population while maintaining a positive counseling relationship. Because again, unless we're able to develop a relationship, our clients, especially athletes, are not going to care what we know until we know they know that they care, that we care. At the same time I was developing the multicultural sports counseling competencies in the field of counseling, another article came out, Ward, in the field of psychology, and they developed the athlete counseling competencies for U.S. psychologists working with athletes, as well as those professionals who have not had any training in this field. And they identified 17 competencies for psychologists and other helping professionals who work with the athlete population. And these competencies are categorized into 3 groups: attitudes and beliefs, skills and knowledge. And they were designed to identify areas in which psychologists and students may need further education. They also believed that having the competencies, same thing that I believed in, would help those that are not trained in sports psychology to identify areas in which they need further education and training, to further define athlete counseling, and to assist athlete clients as well as non-athlete clients to distinguish among available services that is out there. So we have both in the field of psychology as well as in the field of counseling these competencies to work with the athlete population. So why athletes again? Who are these athletes? Why are athletes considered a cultural group? William Sedlacek, I mentioned him and his study at University of Maryland. At the same time, he introduced a formula for calculating non-traditional cultural groups. He stated that we may be discussing the same people, those with cultural experiences different from those of white middle-class men of European descent, those with less power to control their lives, and those who experience discrimination in the United States. So based on that definition, I then took William Sedlacek and said, okay, athletes do have cultural experiences different from those of white middle-class men. Depending on the sport that they're in, they have less power to control their lives, and they experience discrimination. Additionally, when we define culture, we are talking about group norms, roles, and values. We're talking about language, engaging in similar and same activities, and it is related to customs, beliefs, and values, as I mentioned, communication style. So based on William Sedlacek and his definition of non-traditional cultural group and culture, then we were able to define athletes are a group of individuals with their own culture. They face prejudice and are a group that has been oppressed and discriminated against. They have well-defined norms and behaviors and values among and within the group, and they spend a great deal of time together and often have common goals and values generated by their experiences as athletes. An example of this is Rutgers University. Their Department of Sexual Assault Services and Crime Victim Assistance conducted a study about student-athlete culture. And they found in their study in 2002 that a general athlete culture does exist. At minimum, every team expressed feeling separate from their non-athletes, whether through lifestyle, schedule, stress, physical attributes, mentality, or all of these. And I remember when I was in college and I played basketball, I had a non-student athlete as a roommate. And because of my non-traditional schedule, and having to get up for early practices, that was really hard for my roommate. And I ended up my second semester having a roommate change and having somebody on the volleyball team. And even though we didn't play in the same sports, we understood each other's schedule and understood each other's roles in lives. Also, in the Rutgers study, the athletes talked about non-athletes with language that clearly reflected the boundary, and they referred to non-athletes as regular students, normal students. And the participants in the study felt strongly that each team has its own identity. A female athlete explained, every sport, male and female, has different characteristics to them. Like you can totally spot a volleyball player, you can totally spot a basketball player. You can just tell the way they act around their friends. So athletes are a group of people who appear to have a unique cultural and set of experiences in life that differentiate them from others. And athletes must function in an environment that presents a unique, complex set of demands. They have to be a student athlete when they're in K through 12 or in college. They have to perform publicly, and now they're public performers. And they are faced with mastering developmental tasks associated with adolescence, the college years, and the adult years. And everyone goes through normal developmental tasks, but they become a little bit challenging for the athlete population, whether it is in school, balancing academics and athletics, balancing family and athletics, whether you have somebody that plays AAU all the time and they're away all throughout the summer, or Pop Warner, and how does that being away impact the family? But if you also have a parent or parents who are athletes and they are traveling, so balancing family and athletics. Athletes experience isolation. Athletes have to learn early on about managing successes and failures, being able to manage injuries, and terminating athletic career. And I think one of the things that's important about retirement from sport, we even have to think about those athletes from high school that don't go on to play in college. They are experiencing this whole retirement and terminating athletic career earlier. And the research has shown that retirement from sports is very similar to from retirement that older adults experience in later adulthood. There are additional challenges for culturally diverse athletes, whether it's based on race, ethnicity, gender, spirituality, religion, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, just to say, name a few. So there's negative societal biases, stereotypes, and possible mistreatment. Sexual harassment, abuse of female athletes, we've heard about that in the news as it relates to the gymnasts. Racism, sexism, heterosexism, homophobia, classism, and other forms of isms and oppression on psychosocial development. So just like I said earlier, what happens in society happens in sports and vice versa. Another challenge, another mentee of mine, she conducted a study on scholarship athletes from Division I and Division II females who were college athletes that turned mothers. And that's an issue we have to deal with female athletes. In her study, she had 12 participants. 11 of the 12 had pregnancies that were unplanned. 9 of 12 participated in athletic activities while pregnant. Some of them didn't tell their coaches. They didn't tell their athletic trainers. So now this becomes a physical issue as well. 7 of 12 said they were not informed of their legal rights as a pregnant athlete by athletic staff. And 3 of 12 did not return to their sport after giving birth. And so that's a whole nother piece with retirement from sport. Also, so why do we have to have formalized training? Everybody's going to have some kind of experience interacting with a member of the athlete population or a former athlete. Clinical mental health counselors, drug and alcohol, school counselors. I remember with the sports counseling certificate program, I had a student that was school counseling. He graduated and was working with drug and alcohol, and he did the sports counseling certificate. He said he was so appreciative of learning because he had somebody who was in the group who was a former athlete that was still having struggles of their athletic identity. And as an adult, they were still wearing their leather jacket, and their addiction was their way of coping with having these struggles of retirement from sports earlier in their high school career. College counselors, whether it's academic advisors, career counselors, marriage and family therapists, all counselors and other helping professionals, pastors, ministers, psychologists, social workers. I know Emmett Gill is doing a lot of work with social workers and their training with the athlete population as well, and athlete development specialists. So all of these helping professionals are going to interact with members of the athlete population or family members and really have to understand what is the athlete culture and the impact on that family, on that individual. So just a couple more slides before I transition to Jerry. Ethical work with diverse athlete clients. Working with diverse athlete clients require that counselors and other helping professionals have an understanding of the context, historical, social, political, economic, environmental, and familial, is essential for effective service provision. I think right now, big major that's major in our news is the whole understanding of Kaepernick and him putting his knee. And I think it's really important before people judge, they understand the political, the economic, the historical impact and reasons for what he's doing. And that's where our social justice comes in. We have to understand that ethnically, racially, and culturally diverse athlete clients are not a homogeneous group and must not be treated as such. And understand that other cultural, ethnic, and racial worldviews are more helpful in conceptualizing the essence and spirit of diverse athlete clients than are the oppressive ideology of traditional Euro-American psychology or counseling. And that's from Dr. William Parham. He's done a lot of work with APA and their division of sport as well. As a professional counselor or other helping professional, it is important to recognize how working with athlete clients who differ from you may affect you and your ability to counsel them effectively and ethically. It is not essential that there be a perfect match between athlete, client, and counselor or other helping professional on all variables. And again, it's about the relationship, understanding, working with athletes, that there's sometimes going to be a vetting process, and that vetting process is going to entail being challenged and tested. It might be that athlete clients will confront you with questions pertaining to your level of competence. And what happens is, unfortunately, we have professionals in the field who engage in some unethical practice that impacts the athletes that hear about it going to seek services. So I had a colleague share with me that there was a clinician who was qualified to work with this member of the athlete group. And when the athlete got there, the clinician was like, "Oh, I just love you. You're wonderful. Is it possible for me to get your autograph?" And here it is, this person is coming in for help, and the clinician is focused on who they are outside of the counseling session, who they are on the field or on the court. I have another experience when I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Lamar Woodley, who played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, we did an interview, and I asked him why, in his experience, in his opinion, why athletes don't attend church. He said, "Well, we want to attend church. We want to come, but as soon as we walk in the door, people are saying, oh, it's Lamar Woodley. Can you give us money to donate for this? Can you do that?" And then they're not even able to get their spiritual relationship on and their ministry on. And then another story that I think it's really important is that I had an experience where there was someone who was having suicidal ideations, and first thing that happened when they went to the church, "Oh, it's so-and-so, it's so-and-so," not the person at the church recognizing this person needed help. And so this person ended up leaving and having a significant crisis outside the church. And so it's really important that we engage in ethical work with diverse clients. And it's important to acquire academic and experiential multicultural training and having the ability to develop therapeutic relationships. So just a question for you all to ponder. Does sport participation promote positive development and build character? Think about that. Does sport participation promote positive development and build character? The answer, it depends. There are challenges to positive development through sports across the lifespan, whether it's with children, adolescents, adults, young adults, and adults. There's a challenge of transferring of skills to other domains. You know, how do I transfer what I learned in sports to my relationships? How do I transfer what I learned from sports in my personal life, my academic life? Top-down coaching style, what I say goes. There's no collaborative learning approach. Entitlement, a sense of entitlement. Identity foreclosure. This is where someone settles in on their identity as an athlete and hasn't explored other aspects of their identity, and that their confidence is only bracketed in their sport. So what happens where they have a career-ending injury or they retire from sport? Now they're in this crisis. Who am I? I don't know who I am outside of sports. Activities are not fun and they lack challenge. I worked with a student athlete who was an all-star student athlete, and everyone thought that she was going to go on to play professional sports. And her first year, her freshman year in Division I, it just wasn't fun anymore. And she wanted to walk away. And it was really challenging from her because now walking away, it was this public performance. And there were people and fans saying, "Oh, what is she doing?" And it really impacted her anxiety and her depression. Too much emphasis on social comparison, parental over and under involvement, and Jerry's going to talk about that more, so just keep that in mind, parental over and under involvement, and lack of understanding of the developmental needs of athletes. So the benefits of sports participation, we know leadership, healthy competition, positive self-esteem, social competence, greater academic success, confidence, teamwork, discipline, coping competencies, and respect. There's also challenges, their identity, athletic performance challenges, injuries, pressure, isolation, interpersonal relationships, drug and alcohol abuse, other addictions, gambling, crisis situations, transition, retirement from sports, and career planning. These are some of the presenting issues. But the good news is, for all of us on this webinar, sports can provide an environment to positive development. And so if we know that research suggests that athletics may not fulfill the accomplishment of developmental tasks, then we know we have to set up programming. We have to make sure that we have the skills in terms of working with the athletes. And so there is a model of positive youth adult development. And so we have to have a context, an environment for growth, for self-discovery, for self-awareness, for learning about who I am outside of sports. We have to help the athletes and the families surround themselves with external assets. This is where it's caring adult mentors or caring mentors as a whole, peer mentors. So mentoring is really important as it relates to creating a framework for positive youth development. Having a positive community environment. The internal assets is really focusing on those life skills. We want to develop healthy relationships. We want to develop health and wellness and total wellness. And then we want to make sure that everything that we're doing is based on evidence-based research. And that's where our evaluations come in, our program evaluation. So this positive youth adult development in sports provides a systems approach to prevention. And when you hear Jerry talking, you're going to hear him talking about these external assets and these internal assets as well. So as we conclude this session, just based on the role of sports, there could be some key counseling issues: depression, anxiety, PTSD, and trauma, coping skills, stress, eating disorders, career development, retirement, addiction, athletic identity, culture and social justice, society and microaggressions, marriage and family, that individual athletes may be coming into the counseling session. And as I was providing, there is a history of athletic sports counseling, and there are competencies to be able to work with the unique cultural group on these key counseling issues.
Okay, so I thought it was very important to identify the modality of family therapy and apply the family systems approach to the world of sports counseling, because as Dr. Tinsley said, sport is a microcosm of society. So whatever happens in sports can happen in society and events. Family is the maker of meaning for many. So what occurs on the field can influence an athlete's emotional state off the field, and what occurs off the field can affect an athlete's sports performance. These include the emphasis on the viewing of the individual in the context of the surrounding relationships, and an emphasis on patterns of interaction.
So in order to understand this whole systems and family and pattern of interactions, I just wanted to give a quick overview of family systems theories. Some you may know, some you might not be familiar with, but athlete clients are best understood through assessing the interactions within an entire family system. A family system is an interactional unit, and a change in one member affects all members. A systems orientation does not preclude dealing with the dynamics within the athlete client, but this approach broadens the traditional emphasis on individual internal dynamics. And so I mentioned those individual presenting issues that could come in, but those individual issues have an influence on the system. And so part of the system orientation is dealing with the dynamics. Some of the symptoms and concerns are viewed as an expression of dysfunction within a family. An athlete's client's problematic behavior may serve as a function or purpose for the family, are unintentionally maintained by family processes. This is why we want to increase awareness, are a function of the family's inability to operate productively, especially during developmental transitions, retirement, injury, are symptomatic patterns handed down across generations. So what you will hear Jerry talking about within his presentation is the multi-generational approach to family therapy by Murray Bowen. And this stresses exploring patterns from one's family of origin and extended family patterns, and focuses on differentiation of the self and triangulation. So you'll hear him talk more about that. You'll hear him weave in Salvador Minuchin's structural strategic family therapy, which focuses on the family as a system and subsystems, focuses on boundaries and hierarchies, and it focuses on cross-generational coalitions. The goal is to have multiple perspectives in working with athletes and their family, and tailoring the counseling therapy to the needs of the situation of the family. Other approaches is the human validation process model, Virginia Satir, and then the Gottman, John and Julie Gottman method, couples counseling. And so I'll share a little bit about that training and how I've used that work with the athlete population. And that focuses on interventions, assisting with managing conflict, deepening friendship and intimacy, building trust and shared meaning.
We're going to look at some traditional dysfunctionality that happens in families that can be applied to the world of athletics as well. So family systems concerns or presenting issues include parentification, boundaries, including enmeshment and disengagement, triangulation, including conflict and communication, intimacy, unhealthy relationships, children in extended family, family roles, absenteeism, financial concerns, and communication patterns. Now, parentification is defined as a process of role reversal whereby a child is obliged to act as a parent to their own parent. That can include looking after a sick relative, paying bills, or providing assistance to younger siblings that would normally be provided by a parent. I'm going to read an excerpt from Counseling and Psychological Services for college student athletes that describes parentification among student athletes. And it can be applied to youth athletics, and it can be applied to professional athletics as well. Additionally, it is not unusual for the first generation male student athlete to be the family icon upon whom rests the future survival of the entire family. These young men are expected not only to be the breadwinner for whatever family they create, but also to become the primary breadwinner for their family of origin. This puts immediate and substantial pressure on male student athletes who have been adults for only a very short while, almost as though they skip the developmental stage of young adulthood. These male student athletes will be called sometimes daily by mom or sister or brother, younger or older, or aunt. They may be asked to come home on a moment's notice or to use part of their stipend if obtained to help pay bills. Now, time is usually of the essence to these young men. They see their family struggling at home and cannot wait to relieve the strain. They may feel that they are the family's only hope and that everyone is counting on them. As opposed to a second and third generation college student athlete, first generation student athletes may receive less support around day-to-day rigors of academic work and more pressure to fulfill important family roles while fulfilling all their athletic and academic obligations on campus. Understandably, the pressure may become overwhelming. First-generation college students may be more reluctant to voluntarily utilize the services of a university counseling center based on concerns related to confidentiality and cultural norms about disclosing personal information to persons outside of the family. Now, I mean, that reading, that excerpt really stood out to me because, you know, as they stated earlier, talking about developmental stages, it is very important for children or adolescents to go through those developmental stages and to achieve those developmental stages. So when they don't have an opportunity to do so, they end up with concerns that may leak into their adult lives in the form of unfinished business. I remember watching a documentary not too long ago about football in Miami, which is my hometown of South Florida, which is the mecca of youth football. And I remember an NFL athlete saying that he had to do something to get his family out of the situation. So it puts a lot of strain on student athletes or athletes in general, youth athletes, to bear the burden of the family's bear the family's burden, right? Bear the family's financial burden, bear the family's any kinds of burden. Okay. Now, parentification can sometimes lead into triangulation. Triangulation is based on a principle that a two-person interpersonal system is unstable, and that if there is either conflict or fusion between them, a third person will be brought in to stabilize the system. A simple example would be if two friends were having a disagreement with one another, they will often talk about the disagreement with a third person rather than trying to resolve it with each other. The third person will feel caught in the middle. Similarly, if two people are over-involved with one another, they will disagree or have conflict with the third person. Having a mutual enemy keeps their over-involved relationship stable. Now, triangulation was based on Mary Bowen's theory of triangulation in the family systems theory. And from that, the athletic triangle was made. And that talks about the triangulation that can occur between an athlete, a parent, and a coach, and how alliances can be built, kind of disrupting communication and causing conflict between either athlete, parent, and coach and parent versus the athlete. And, you know, it's very important for a healthy coach-parent relationship for youth development in sports. But these triangles aren't unique to just athlete, parent, and coach. These triangles occur all the time. They can happen within the family. It could be parent and parent against the athlete or the child, child-parent against another parent, and sometimes it happens on the family, on the team family. It can happen between player and coach, head coach, assistant coach, and player, and it just calls for a lot of conflict. So we're going to move on to the section of boundaries. A boundary is the area of emotional and behavioral individuation between family members, and it falls on a continuum from enmeshment to disengagement. Now, enmeshment refers to an extreme form of proximity and intensity in family interactions in which members are over-concerned or over-involved in each other's lives. Now, what enmeshment can look like in the world of athletics is over-involved parents, dual role by parents. That is where the parent not only serves as a parent, but they serve as the athlete's financial advisor and athlete's agent. Family discord that results in poor athletic performance. parents living vicariously through an athlete, that means that the parent maybe got to a certain point in athletics and they didn't make it, so they want to push their child to become what they didn't become. And pay for play is an example of how enmeshment is involved in athletics. And pay for play meaning you have a parent that is essentially auctioning off their student athlete to different universities and accepting money, which can be an extreme violation of NCAA rules. Now, enmeshment is the most problematic for coaches, universities, and organizations. Over-involved parents, the parenting style, over-involved parents have an excessive amount of involvement in the athletic success of their children. They have a need that is satisfied through their children's participation, or they have a hidden agenda, hoping that children's success will provide later opportunities in education or career. They are not able to separate their own wishes and fantasies and needs from those of their children. And this can be dangerous. Effects of enmeshment can cause issues in athletes, including eating disorders, dependency, and substance use, or an athlete can lose their job if they're cut off from the team, emotionally cut off from the team, or they can diminish, have their playing time decreased. Another example of enmeshment that I can think of is, I remember watching a highly touted football recruit, and he was getting ready to announce his commitment to university, and he was with his family. He's on national TV. He picked a team, and his mother was decked out in the gear of another team, and she did not appreciate it. And she abandoned him at the stage, at the podium, and he was visibly distraught. I mean, he couldn't finish his interview on national TV, and he was truly affected by his mom's over-involvement of his decision to better his life. Now, possible interventions for enmeshment include differentiation of self. Now, differentiation of self is demonstrated by the degree to which a person can think, plan, and follow his or her own values or convictions, particularly around anxiety-provoking issues, without having behavior automatically driven by the emotional cues from others. One way people can differentiate their degree of relative differentiation is through speaking in I statements. And I remember reading a quote one time that said it's a parent's job to teach children how to think, not what to think. I think that it's very important to adopt that principle. And I statements, what they look like is essentially what's on the screen right now. I statements have been found to be an effective tool in dealing with enmeshment, among many other concerns, because it fosters more of an honest exchange in communication. Rather than blaming the other person in conflict, I statements encourage both partners to take responsibility for their feelings and express them directly, thus improving the chances of resolving conflict. Ironically enough, when Murray Bowen introduced this term into his theory, he preferred to be called a coach because he was able to serve as an active expert who calmly assisted the family members through low-key directions in defining and clarifying their emotional responses to one another. I love teaching I statements personally because to clients, because it helps foster authentic communication while lowering defensiveness. Defensiveness is a natural response when someone is being confronted, but when you externalize behavior and you can focus on your grievance, on the behavior and not the person, it makes for a much smoother transaction. At the end of the other spectrum of enmeshment and disengagement is disengagement, which means rigid boundaries. Members of disengaged families function separately and autonomously, but with little sense of family loyalty. Now, what disengagement can look like among the athlete population is parents' lack of attendance at games, minimal financial investment for sports that need funds for athletes to excel, under-involved in the athletes' transportation to and from games. Now, the main characteristic of this type of family organization has a large psychological space between members. They tend to be rather separate individuals. So the example that I read was where a ski academy is concerned, these parents will send their children to the school and make little effort to be involved in his or her sport activity. The parents do not come to help with races. In some cases, they never even come to see their child compete. In a local youth program, the child will often rely on coaches and peers for equipment, needs, transportation, and emotional support. These children seem to have little supervision at home. As young athletes, they have to do their own thing. Now, this can cause that enmeshment or that triangulation if disengagement isn't addressed or decreased in the family system. Now, some possible interventions for disengagement include a genogram, which essentially looks at familiar patterns of discord across a multi-generational span. Psychoeducation teaches techniques to reduce behavioral deficits that can contribute to depression. A meta-emotional interview would be helpful here because it would explore how family members have dealt with or usually deal with anger issues. It teaches how to suppress anger. It can lead to avoidance behavior and depression. Another helpful intervention would be to explore for a pattern of avoidant behaviors in a depressed family member. You can use techniques such as graded exposure and coping skills training to reduce avoidant behavior. Lastly, a possible intervention would be to confront patterns of speaking through which other family members are using only nonverbal communication. Instruct family members to speak directly, respectively, clearly, and for themselves. Another concern that presents itself in family and can affect athletics and vice versa is financial distress in athletics. Now, that can lead to extended family dependency, which is essentially when an athlete either reaches collegiate status or professional status, they sometimes come into money, whether it's a stipend or a large salary, and they have an income increase, and everyone expects to have their needs met, their financial needs met, which can, of course, cause enmeshment and is a form of parentification. Also, sudden retirement, which means a drastic decrease in family income occurs through either one or both parents' loss of employment or some other type of financial crisis. Now, sudden retirement means that, once the player stops playing, whether it's college sports or professional sports, the hopes and dreams of continuing to make a large amount of money stops, and that can cause distress in the family, whether it's in the extended family or the family of origin, or the nuclear family, for that. Dependency issues place tension on and a burden of responsibility onto others, causing resentment and friction in the home. Now, one way to manage financial relationships with family and friends is to set a budget, and coaching athletes to set a budget and coaching them into giving parents and family members a budget that can be separate from your personal budget or from an athlete's personal budget. For example, give mom or other family members a certain amount of money per month, and explain that once this fund is depleted for the month, it's until next month that they won't see those funds again. I think that's called family endowment fund, if I'm not mistaken. You can one can use a financial planner or advisor as a buffer to handle the situations when purchasing a house for a family member to make sure that the price fits within their budget. Now, some possible interventions for financial distress include encouraging athlete clients to separate their feelings of frustration with the financial situation from the people in the situation, focusing the energy on solving the problem rather than fighting. Now, it's easy to say, it's easy to get into quarrels over money, but if you can teach the athlete or the family to externalize the problem from the behavior, the behavior from the person, then you can really focus your grievance on that, and it can foster more healthy communication. Family sculpting is an option for possible intervention, and you can teach techniques to reduce behavioral deficits that can contribute to depression. And psychoeducation, educate the family system about the dynamics of unhealthy dependency, which can include enabling exploitation of power. Another concern in athletics can appear in the form of absenteeism. Now, absenteeism can affect everyone in the family, not just the athlete. It can affect the parents. It can affect the children in the family. It can cause academic distress among student athletes or high school athletes, athletes in general, because athletes are spending, in order to excel in their sport, they have to spend a lot of time training, which can take away from their academic abilities. Another effect of the consequence of absenteeism is missed family events and milestones, which can cause isolation, depression, and vulnerability. Separation from spouse and children is also an issue that arises in absenteeism among athletics. Some possible interventions for absenteeism among in the family system is psychoeducation, again, teaching family members how to support each other in the use of coping skills and in the redistribution of the roles in the household. Assist family members in identifying conflicts over the absence by tracing when they surface and relate their development to the absent member. You can also use family sculpting by utilizing family sculpting or reverse role playing to facilitate the expression of difficult emotions or issues. Okay. Now we're going to move on to another issue, a concern in family systems and athletics, which is issues in intimate relationships. Okay. Now, what is intimacy? Intimacy doesn't necessarily have to mean sexual intimacy. Intimacy is connection and closeness. It's what keeps people together, and there are many different types of intimacy. There's romantic, physical, intellectual, emotional, verbal, affectional intimacy. And I'm going to read another excerpt from the book called Counseling and Psychological Services for College Student Athletes. That essentially it talks about young male athletes learning how to navigate romantic relationships differently than their non-athlete counterparts. It says, quite often, male student athletes are not developmentally prepared to negotiate the attention given to them by females. The potential to earn millions of dollars often creates a godlike aura around them. And, in a campus where an athlete is playing in a high revenue sport, it's easy for them to be seen as a ticket to success. And on the other side, an athlete sometimes uses that attention to get their needs met, or male athletes can use that attention to get their needs met. And it builds a relationship on a quid pro quo basis, which is not really a good foundation to build a healthy healthy intimacy. Intimacy associated with female athletes, there are also concerns of shame that can be brought up among female pregnancy. And if a female fears that she will be kicked off a team because of pregnancy, they can turn to isolation, thus not forming, healthy relationships as well. And lastly, we're going to talk about dysfunctional communication. Relationships with authority figures can be a source of interpersonal distress. Resultantly, athletes can become skilled at managing people in their lives. Similar to the communication with their coaches, athletes can create unhealthy communication patterns by simply saying what their coaches and parents or partners may want to hear.
So one of the things that, I was talking developmentally, one theory that I really like to use is Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. And we know that early development impacts later development. And Erikson has these crises that individuals must resolve. And you can move to the next stage, but if you had not resolved the previous stage, that can impact another stage. So I like to start with adolescence because that is a time for identity development versus role confusion. And oftentimes, if you have somebody who has a foreclosed identity and has not explored or they have diffused their identity, and they move into young adulthood, which is the next stage is intimacy versus isolation, there can be a challenge to developing healthy intimacy skills in interpersonal relationships. So one of the things that's going to be important with family, marriage and family, is helping members of the athlete system to develop healthy relationships. And so I say that there are 4 C's to healthy relationships when I'm working with the families. The first C is effective communication. And one of the things we have to do is help the family understand where their communication patterns come from. And that's where the Genogram may come in. Or are they, I really like some of you might be familiar with transactional analysis and games people play. And we have the parent, adult, child. And what are they playing out in terms of what they've heard from their own parents and their family of origin, or what they heard from their coaches. So when we talk about effective communication skills, we are trying to teach both verbal and nonverbal. And then there's also got to be conflict resolution and management skills. Conflicts are inevitable. And I think one of the things we have to help people to understand is we live in a world that's full of conflict. So we're going to have conflict in our relationship, but it's developing some skills to manage those conflicts and communicating. Number 3, having compassion and empathy and understanding each of the family roles, and then being committed. So what I do is I like to help the families and the athletes understand what areas of these 4 C's might you need to work on. Are some of these areas you're working on coming from dysfunctional patterns of behavior that you received from your family of origin, that you may have received from the coaching style? Because it's really based on socialization and where did they learn these communication styles. Unhealthy relationships, I try to help families and athletes understand this whole idea of power and control. Some of you might be familiar with the power and control wheel, but on the power and control wheel, we have physical abuse, sexual abuse, isolation, using the kids. And so really trying to help understand some of those components of unhealthy relationship. We also deal with infidelity and betrayal in relationships. I come from a perspective that people can reconcile from betrayal and infidelity, but we need to really get behind where that infidelity has come from, the betrayal, the impact on trust now, And then understanding when there is betrayal, when there is a break in trust, that it can impact trauma in the relationship. It can increase PTSD with members of the family system, including the children. And oftentimes, if somebody has come from a trauma, a place of trauma from their early development, having a break in trust or some other trauma in the family, in the marriage, can reignite those past presenting issues. So I think, Jerry, you were going to talk about some interventions.
Yes, some more interventions that could be applied to mitigating unhealthy relationships include psychoeducation. So what you can do is discuss the appropriateness of boundaries as well as the negative results of enmeshment with parentification of the child. I'm sorry, moving on to coping skills. You can address with the family how to cope with the word of the infidelity reaching extended family members and the community. Now, this is especially important with families that may be in the public eye, because oftentimes news of an infidelity can leak to the media, and that can be very shameful and traumatizing to the family, especially if they weren't able to deal with it within their family unit. Circular questioning. You can conduct an open-ended discussion about the children's feelings of anger, frustration, and betrayal of trust towards the unfaithful parent. You can utilize assertiveness training, confrontational skills, and letter writing as a means of expressing emotions. And you can also use I statements here in helping children understand or better get their point across in a better, more concise manner. Oh, and when I mentioned psychoeducation, I mentioned that because sometimes in an affair, and one of the parents or one of the parents of the children speak to the children about the affair, the infidelity, and that of course is developmentally inappropriate. That is an emotional aspect of parentification. So that's where you would need to discuss the appropriateness of boundaries as well as the negative results of enmeshment with and parentification of the child.
And then just what I was reiterating earlier, the trauma from current break in trust or betrayal can also be impacted, influenced by the early trauma, could be child abuse, abandonment. And this is where you can use interventions that Jerry mentioned, but also interventions from individual PTSD weaved into the family system and weaved into the interventions that you're using. So as we come to our last slide, and we'll open it up for questions using the chat box, some other family system techniques and interventions could be joining. It's really important to join with the family. Again, that's that part of the competencies, the multicultural sports counseling competencies, is being able to develop that cross-cultural relationship and joining. Boundary setting, helping the family and the athletes with reframing. Lots of homework assignments with families and with athletes. And one homework assignment is developing SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-oriented. And I know when I'm working with my short-term SMART goals, and we will incorporate that into the counseling process. And then also part of the techniques and intervention is really helping families and athletes understand forgiveness and the forgiveness process, and understanding how to rebuild trust. And so those are some other techniques and interventions that can be utilized. Now, I know that this webinar is only scheduled for an hour and a half. I will tell you, if you think about athletic counseling, The program at Springfield College is a full master's program. Each class is 45 clock hours. The sports counseling certificate program, 9 to 12 credits. So we can only touch upon basic components in this one webinar, but it's my hope that we can continue to engage in the conversation, continue to expand athletic counseling. For those of you that might not be a part of the ACA Sports Counseling Interest Network, it's a place where people can interact and talk. And at ACA's conference in New Orleans, we'll have a table for the Sports Counseling Interest Network to have more discussion. So it's my hope that we can continue this discussion moving forward. So with the fact that we have about 10 minutes remaining, are there any questions that anyone wants to pose on the chat? Questions, comments, concerns? Now, I know some people are on the phone, so can we get a copy of the PowerPoint slides? Yes, Susanna, I will be emailing these to Dessa, and she will be emailing them out. What resources do you recommend to get more information about counseling athletes? I don't know if you're a part of ACA, and if not, you can always email me too, but on the Sports Counseling Interest Network, I have a list of references. So there's some with journal articles in different books. I don't know if you're interested in taking more classes, but the Sports Counseling the Sports Counseling Certificate at California University of Pennsylvania. And then I would say I made references to the National Association of Academic Advisors for Athletics and Student Development Professionals. M4A is formally called, but it's part of NACADA. Going to their website. They have an annual conference every year. And I would just say resources, the reference list that's on the sports counseling, connecting with different professional organizations. So if you have a master's in clinical mental health counseling, you can do the certificate. One of the things we know from our ACA codes of ethics, we want to practice within the scope of our training. And for me, because I do have the training as part of my doctoral program and as part of my concentration, I'm able to say that I have a specialty in sports counseling. So you definitely want to get the certificate. So you could say that you are a master's level counselor, licensed professional counselor with a specialty in counseling, sports counseling, athletic counseling. Thanks, Norio. I'm glad that this was informative for you. And anybody, feel free, I think on the Eventbrite, and if not, when Dessa sends the PowerPoint, you have both Jerry and I's email. Please don't hesitate to ever email me. And if anybody's going to be at ACA, I will be at the Sports Counseling Interest Network table. As long as I don't have any AMCD stuff pulling me away, but I plan on being there.
I wanted to add this as a reference or a resource to read for information about counseling athletes. It's a great book. It's easy to read, and I think it could be updated a little bit, but we can, if anyone wants the title.
Etzel.
Etzel, yes.
Yes.
I can email it to you or show you.
And it's on the reference list too on the Sports Counseling Interest Network, that book, because that's one of the books that's used for the Sports Counseling Certificate Program. And so there's also, there's another book that's the Life Skills Planning book for athletes. And so that's on the resource list. But if you can't find the resource list, feel free to email me. I have an electronic copy, Tinsley I'll just put it in the chat box.
Well,
Any other? Oh, go ahead, Dessa. I'm sorry.
that's okay. I just want to say your presentation was so comprehensive that people may not have questions because I feel like you covered everything and more. But are there any final thoughts you had for us? The resources were amazing, but I'm thinking in terms of like myself as a doc student, where do you think is a perfect place for us to start, like right today?
I would say start today. You're a doc student. You're a member of ACA. So go and become connected with the Sports Counseling Interest Network so you can be in a group of like-minded people. And one of the things I believe too is because athletes are a unique cultural group, and as you learn about athletes, you'll be able to apply this to other unique populations. I know here in Philadelphia, we took the same concept and we have applied it to pastors because pastors are a unique cultural group. So just being around like-minded people, networking. I know last year at ACA when we had the Sports Counseling Interest Network meeting, a lot of people networked and connected and are still connected. And again, I just would say reading the resources, the course textbooks. There's so many journal articles now in the field of counseling, in addition to that in psychology. If anybody is deciding to do a dissertation on this topic, I don't know if you have your topic yet, but I can give you some gaps and some areas for research as well. So thank you all, appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming and being a part of the AMCD Professional Development Programming. For all of our attendees today, you will receive an email later from me today that will include the CEU link as well as the PowerPoint from them as well, including any other contact information you are looking for. So again, I just want to thank you, Mr. Jasmine and Dr. Tinsley for joining us, and I hope you all have a great weekend.
All right, thank you all.